Hi, this is Chris Hoy. Thank you for joining me today on Create with Chris. I am so excited to share with you not one, but two different designs I did on the brand new convertible line. So grab your brushes and be prepared to learn some unique techniques and find out why this new convertible line is so spectacular. The new convertible set is 4 pieces and it is interchangeable. I'm going to remove the back piece and work with the top 3 pieces, and as always I give it a quick coat with multi-surface sealer just to make sure that the paint will adhere well and I will have a perfectly smooth surface. It's also kinder to your brushes. I'm using an 1.5 inch wash because this is a big plaque. A bigger brush makes sense, and also it results there's not going to be any brush strokes and it'll be much smoother. Give it a dry and a quick sand. I'm using Colonial Blue and my 3/4 inch oval wash, kind of slapping it on, and I work from the center toward the outer edges. It helps eliminate any paint that might kind of drip down the outer edges. And I'm just doing a light coat. I don't want to put it on too heavy. Let it dry and then I'll give it a second coat. I've loaded the toe of my oval wash with Deep Midnight Blue, and I'm slapping it around. I start at the outer edge and I work toward the center. The paint is very loose. I have a lot of water in my brush. It allows me to move the paint around. I want it darker toward the edges, lighter toward the center, but I also like that little bit of shifting or movement in the background. I think that just gives that much more appeal to the background. Blend it in. I want to see light and dark, but no spotty areas. Now that I let that dry, I'm going in with my 3/4 inch angle and I'm shading around the outer edge. Again, this is a loose, very wet brush so that I can move this around quickly, and I'm kind of a chop float so that I maintain that looseness of that background movement. And I make sure that the heel of my brush is clean so that I have that portion of my brush to blend it out. This is the Brocade Collage stencil. It's a beautiful stencil. It has so much design in it, and because it offers so much different design, I can use some of it, part of it, sections of it. It's just a super stencil to work with. I love using it and I use it often. I am stenciling with my Spectacular stencil brush and Payne's Gray. This is a dry brush so that I don't have strong design, but look at that, it's just absolutely beautiful. And I wanted to create that same replication across, and you notice the stencil it doesn't flow from one design if you move it over to the next, so I'm just picking and choosing. I want that brocade design in the middle, so I just place that portion of the stencil in the middle of the plaque and I dry brush more Payne's Gray on it, lift it. If there's any empty areas, I'll just scooch the stencil over and put some of that design in that area. Wanted to keep that lattice kind of toward the outer edges and the brocade toward the inner edges, and I'll just scoot it over and make it come out so that you just shift the stencil and reposition it. As long as your paint is light, it's not really noticeable. Now I'm going back in and filling in any empty areas with just a little portion of the stencil. It just needs design, and believe me, it's not going to be that empty with area. See what that does. Now I wasn't sure where I wanted my stars, so I went in with my white chalk pencil and I just tested where I wanted them to be. After I decided that's where I wanted it, I am using a stencil. You can paint them, but I think a stencil just really makes it perfect and it's so much easier. I'm using the Spectacular stencil brush and bleach sand. I'm pouncing just to give a little more heaviness, opaqueness on the stars. It's still going to take a couple coats, but it's always best to give a couple light coats as opposed to one heavy coat. If you've not used my stencil brushes, they're a softer bristle, which is going to give a smoother coverage. And one thing my stencil brushes offer that there is no other stencil brush on the market does, if you need to change colors, you simply wash it out, towel dry it, you can go on to the next color. I'm adding the pouncing because it's going to be a little bit more opaque than a dry brush, but still I'm going to give two nice even coats. And you can see how well that covers just with one coat. Adding the second coat, and it's almost just absolutely perfect. I love using my stencil brushes. I was never much of a stenciler before, but because these work so similar to a paintbrush, I love using them. I'm going to add a little bit of age to the stars. I'm using my 1/2 inch awesome angle and cobblestone. The awesome angles are just a little bit longer in the length, which will allow for a longer stroke, which results in a smoother coverage. So that, it just makes sense. Adding this color mostly on the bottom and the right side of all the tines. And I want my stars to still be a little bit, I don't want to say white, but light. I don't want them too dark or grungy, so I'm keeping this very light. I have a lot of moisture on my brush, and I'm floating it out, blending it into that bleached sand very softly. So a little bit of paint makes a big difference. This is one of those situations where that is very evident. Going back with raw umber, this is a super strong color, so I will warn you to kind of back off on the coverage. Adding a little bit to strengthen those shaded areas. What a difference that just that little bit of paint makes. So it doesn't take much. I did bump down to a 1/4 inch angle just to make sure I'm not applying too wide of a shade. And you can see it's not much paint at all, just a little bit, but wow, what a difference that makes. And this raw umber is just a beautiful color. It gives a lot of earthiness. It gives a lot of age. And I'm not too worried about being a perfect smooth float because I want this to look a little bit aged and distressed. Keep that heel of my toe clean so I can smooth it out. And I kind of am liking the way that the float looks. If it is just a little bit uneven and a little bit not quite perfect, you just get a totally different effect from that type of float. And just let that float out. Just really I think adding a little bit of speckling always adds a little more interest and age to it. So I've just lightly speckled it using my splatter brush with bleached sand. This is the middle section. I was going to take this part out, but I was using the 3/4 inch oval wash to base coat that. Oh my goodness, it was taking forever and it was not very smooth, and I was really working hard, and I thought, why am I doing this? I went with my 1.5 inch flat wash. Oh my goodness, what a difference. The tools that you use are such a big factor in creating a less stressful painting environment. So if it's taking forever to add a base coat, think about bumping up to a bigger brush. And even though I'm using a bigger brush, I'm not putting the paint on heavier. It's still going to require 2 coats to give a nice solid opaque coverage. But I'm telling you, I cut my painting time, base coating time down at least by half. You notice I still start in the middle and work toward the edges. That helps keep the side edges very clean and prevents a guarantee that you won't get paint on the side edges, but it sure does cut down any chance of that happening. And then just smooth it out. I try to eliminate all those stop and start lines because that's what's really going to show up. Give it a quick dry and add the second coat. Now I'm going in with the cobblestone And I'm using, instead of an angle, I'm using the oval wash just to kind of shade around the outer edges. I thought that might give it more of a rustic effect, and I wanted this to have the look of age, but it's very hard when you're working with bright colors to tone them down. So I decided that I did not like the way that looked. It was a little too choppy, a little too rough, so I went back to my 3/4 inch angle to lay that cobblestone in, still doing that kind of a chop float to smooth the paint out. If it's a little too choppy, I did go back with the mop brush and just kind of soften that down. Still have that movement, that little bit of distress without it being overwhelming. Let it dry. I did bump down to a 1/2 inch angle. I used the 3/4 inch before. I was so hoping that oval wash would work for shading, but I just didn't like it that well. Went back now with the raw umber. Make sure that that cobblestone is dry so you don't lift it up. Just adding a little bit. Remember, this color is very strong. It's not going to take much to add the effect. You don't want it to look dirty, and there's just a real fine line between just enough and too much. Soften that down. I have a lot of moisture in my brush. I can really almost go around the entire section and still go back and move paint around before it dries. Now, if you're in an arid area, you might need to go to a glazing medium or a mister. I wanted to replicate that same design down below. Up above in the blue section, I started out with the lattice. For this one, I wanted just to start out with the brocade. I thought that would look good and not have samey. So I see how I can just move the stencil around. It doesn't have to be, I did flip it over, so make sure if you do flip it over that you clean it before you flip it over. But I just wanted that design in the background. Doesn't have to be perfect and balanced. Just a very dry brush using cobblestone and the spectacular stencil brush. And I'm going to go in and add just a little bit more because I just used portions of this to fill it in. Look at that. It just looks great. Such a simple, easy trick to fill in any areas that are just a little bit too plain or boring. If it's too intense, I have a very fine sandpaper. I think it's a 220 grit. Just lightly buff it. That's going to tone it down and still maintain that look. Position the stencil not only side to side, but center it from top to bottom as well. Always use painter's tape to anchor it down so it doesn't shift while stenciling. And because I'm kind of a messy painter, I always tape off any parts of the stencil where I don't want any paint to accidentally end up. Once everything is secured and it's in place, I'm going to use a darker color. I'm going with soft black. Really wanted this America to stand strong, and so I'm using a more intense color. I thought that would really make it stand out well. Loaded my spectacular stencil brush. I'm still using the number 5, and I'm being very careful and pouncing up and down. When I load my stencil brush, and I don't think I addressed this before, but when it's loaded with paint, I always brush the tips over a paper towel to remove excess paint. That's going to ensure that there's no paint going to seep underneath the stencil. And that's probably the biggest problem people have with stenciling is those ragged edges. There's 2 things that's going to cause that. One is too much paint on the brush, and the other is not anchoring the stencil down well enough. I always suggest 2 light coats as opposed to 1 heavy coat. And even though this is a dark color, yeah, there you can see I'm wiping it over a paper towel. Even though this is a dark color, I'm still going to back off on that coverage to make sure that I just get it on and maintain those crisp edges. It's going to take a little bbit of time, but I'm telling you, it's so well worth it. And the edges can be cleaned up, but if you're more careful when you're stenciling and you can avoid that step, it just makes your time a little more pleasant, a little less stressful and fun. And on these letters, especially if there's little tiny sections, slowing down and making sure to not shift that stencil around is so integral in getting a nice clean stencil when you're finished. And I think you can see what a difference that second coat does make. Just making sure, and even with the second coat, I'm always going to wipe that brush off to make sure that I get those nice clean edges. Now when I stencil, I like to have a continuous look on some of my pieces. So I'm just picking up my Epic Script liner and soft black, and I'm just going to connect all of those areas where the bridges are so that it looks like it's hand painted as opposed to stenciled. I don't always do this. I guess it just kind of depends on preference. But I think for this particular piece, I wanted it to look more like a hand painted sign. I wanted to do more to that section, but I'm going to jump down to the stripes. I am terrible with straight lines, and they always go kind of wonky. So I'll show you what I do. I'm using 2-inch painter's tape and my T-square. I couldn't paint or live without my T-square. It always ensures that my lines are going to be straight up and down. So I've put a 2-inch, my stripes are 2 inches wide. So I placed a piece of tape on my T-square, and that way I know with the tape on it, it's going to be exactly 2 inches wide. I can anchor that. These are where the white stripes are going to be, where the solid tape is. Going to anchor that down. I can line that up to the edge of the stripe that I just adhered, and then I can put the next section down. I know it's going to be perfectly straight up and down because of my T-square. I know it's going to be perfectly 2 inches wide because that's the width of the tape, and the tape is on the T-square. So I'm telling you, you can't go wrong. There's always a trick to making sure. See how perfect those are? I'm terrible with straight lines. So this is what I do to kind of ensure that I'm going to look good when it's a little fussy, but I'm telling you, it's so well worth it. To me, that's so much easier than deciding afterwards that I made the stripes just a little bit crooked. So I kind of check the length of the stripe, cut the tape off, and then I can adhere it. And I like to push the ends down and behind. That way, if you don't, they're going to be sticking to your tabletop and you're going to be struggling with that. Using that 1.5 inch flat wash, oh my gosh, to put the paint on. This is Wild Berry. Just putting it on loosely and then going back and smoothing it out with that brush. It is amazing. Look how nice and smooth that is. As with everything else, 2 coats is going to work out much, much better. And I just smooth it on I'm just so quick. I was afraid I was going to get paint on my other pieces. It was kind of dried out, so I did use my mister to, instead of dampening my brush, just put a little bit of paint or water on the surface. I did put 2 coats on, and you have to look for the edge of the tape, but I'm floating deep burgundy down each side of the red stripe. And kind of the same concept that I did on all the other sections. Wanted to keep that continuity. So this is not a perfectly smooth float. I did want these stripes, Wild Berries, a little bit on the pink, but with deep burgundy to shade it. Oh my gosh, it turns into a beautiful deep kind of rustic red, very deep and rich. Use my mop brush to smooth that float out. And you can see what a difference this is making. Because I want this to have layers and depth, this will not be my only shade. So when I'm creating the first in a design, I have to kind of play around with how it's going to look. So I often back off on adding heavy color, and I find out that as many times as not, if I planned on going back and adding a second coat, usually I end up not doing it. So with this, I wasn't sure I was going to need that second float on it. After it dried, I decided I would go back and put that brocade design, just pulling that through, using deep burgundy just to put a light design on that. Wow, what a difference. So in my mind, I'm trying to decide if I need that second shade or if this design is going to do it. But this also, it kind of serves two purposes. See, it's not long enough, but I can just kind of bump it up and replicate it, and it's just going to look beautiful. Not only is this color going to add design on the stripe, but also it's creating more of a redness because of that layer of design over top of that wild berry. Just makes such a huge difference. And who would have thought this little stencil could offer so much? I love using it. It's just absolutely been the solution to many of my design dilemmas. Just putting a little bit of design in, and it even has script on there. I just think this stencil is amazing. And I'm so dying to take this the tape off. That's my favorite part, taking the tape off, but I'm trying to be patient here. And just filling it in with just a little bit of design here and there. It's gonna work, trust me. Okay, here's the big unveiling. Look at that. Now I will tell you, when I put this tape down, I was so worried about it being straight that I forgot to go back and press the side edges down. So you can see that I had a little bit of red that seeped under the tape. That will not happen if you press it down. I did on the first one, but not on the others. So I'm just using a little bit of bleach sand, my Epic script liner, and cleaning it up. I tried to go back and lift that off with my Mono Zero eraser, but deep burgundy is, and any reds are just such a strong color that it's really hard to remove them completely. So it was just easier to paint over it. Only took a minute, but when you're putting your tape on, make sure you go back, really seal those side edges before you start painting the red stripes. It will save a lot of worry. Now I decided I wanted some little bit of design on the white stripes, so I didn't want it to be too prominent. So I'm thinking that I would use this lattice design, and I will go back with cobblestone and stencil that in. And because the stencil lattice section was a little bit wider than the stripes, if I put a piece of painter's tape on each side, the width of the stripe, then I don't have to worry about getting that cobblestone onto the red stripe. Just a very soft dry brush. Didn't go into that brocade design, just wanted this lattice, but I can lift it, shift it down, and it's just going to line up perfectly. If you're liking this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you have any questions, would love to hear from you. Just let me know where you're watching from. If you have any suggestions for future videos, I like to hear those as well. Just this, again, this is a soft dry brush, just to give that little bit of color. Looks a little bit stark on that bleach sand background, but remember, I haven't done any shading down the sides yet either. Just a fun way to add design. I just love how this is turning out. Just super easy to line that up. I've even made lace tablecloths out of this stencil. It is one of my go-to stencils when I'm trying to decide on a design in the background, or you can even put it like if you're doing a vase of flowers. The brocade makes a beautiful china print. The lattice work is a great in the background design. Don't make this too heavy and dark, just that light coverage is all that's needed, that indication of design. Perfect. My stencil brush was kind of, I had used most of the paint out of it, so some of that design was a little bit too light, so I just went back and dry brushed it a little bit more. Now I'm going down each side of this of the white stripes with cobblestone, using that 3/4 inch angle brush and kind of chop floating it in there. And you can see what a difference that helps. I don't want to say mute that stencil design down, but it just helps to tone it down and make it look like it fit in. I got a little bit carried away with that cobblestone, and I think my brush was a little bit too big. So I dropped down to my 1/2 inch angle. Sometimes, you know, a bigger brush, I try to go as big as what I think will work for an area, but sometimes it's too big and you end up having problems with, you know, paint getting in areas where it shouldn't be. Just a little more control with a 1/2 inch angle. Keep that paint loose, a lot of moisture in the brush, just a little bit of a float. Doesn't have to be a heavy float. I always keep it lighter. It's easy to go back and put a second float on. So much easier than it is to go back and try to figure out how to lighten it up. So I always suggest that you back off on the intensity of the color and just let it float in. And if you need more, more can always be added. And later on I did go back and add a little bit more. Now I did put the raw umber around the edge of the middle section with the America on it, and I thought I wanted to keep that same balance, and that's what I put on the stars as well. So I'm just going in with raw umber. Again, this is a very strong color, so I have it a lot of water on my brush, and you can see I can do the whole side without reloading. You need to make sure your brush is loaded well. I can go down that whole side, kind of just get that color in there, and then go back and touch it up and blend it as needed. It works out so much better than trying to do a little bit at a time. A lot more continuity, it's much smoother, and it blends out very nicely. Again, if you're in an arid area, you might, I like the Fast Dry Glaze Meeting. It's a Joe Sonia product. It's also available at CD Wood, or you can use a Distress Mist Sprayer. Make sure when you do these shades of raw umber that they kind of balance out, that the intensity is pretty even. Because I put the raw umber on there and the Payne's gray in the blue area, I thought the red needed to be toned down a little bit more. I was planning on going back with another float of deep burgundy, but I decided to try antique maroon. Worked out perfectly. It brings that earthiness, that rich color, and I can go in, you see little places where the two colors bump up against each other. This is a great way to go in there and clean that up, and just, the antique maroon is as deep as the raw umber, so they really bump up against each other nicely, and it creates that same deep, rich balance. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you're enjoying this. I have quite a few other videos, so make sure that you check them out as well. If you've not signed up for the newsletter at Cupboard Distributing, go to www.cdwood.com and sign up for the newsletter. There's always a lot of specials and sales, so if you want to pick up any of the supplies that I'm using today, they are all available at cdwood.com. And don't forget Facebook. Check out my Facebook page or Cupboard Distributing and see what's going on. What a difference this little bit of antique maroon makes. And I'm not using heavy color, but I'm using a lot of moisture to blend it out. Just gives a nice glow. Love how that turned out. I added splatter on the top and the middle section, and I wanted to continue that splattering on. I used raw umber mainly on the white stripes, and I thought I would get more contrast if I used bleached sand on the red stripes, so it would show up just a little bit more. And one thing I love about this splatter brush, you can hone in and pretty much direct the splatters exactly where you want them. I added just a little bit more on the top section. It's really nice to go back and forth, and I decided the middle section needed a little color, so I used my Epic script liner and thinned deep burgundy. Load the liner well, and I'm using not necessarily the tip of the brush, but kind of laying it down flat and pulling it along. On the stripes on each edge, I do use my finger kind of like a compass, and that helps keep the brush straight. If you notice, the top of the white and red stripes don't have shading on it, or I guess just the white ones don't have shading, just really stood out. I went back and added some raw umber across the tops, just brings that tone back in. Looked at it, added a little more splattering just to kind of fill up the empty areas and help it to blend and be more continuous. Now the fun part. This is the easy switch option too, and this is what makes the convertible so amazing. You can pop each section out and switch it very, very easily. And I thought it would be fun to create another option for the middle section. And I'm going through this very quickly because I did everything the same as with the first one. I base coated it bleached sand, and then I floated cobblestone very loosely around the outer edge. Used the brocade stencil and just dry brush a little bit of soft design in the back. Wipe it off, flip it over, and apply it. It's almost a mirror image. It doesn't have to be exact, but that little bit of design adds so much. On the 4th of July stencil, it's not only centered left to right, but also top to bottom. And I don't usually use painter's tape to mask off stencils. And when I did this, I remembered the reason why. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But I wanted to stencil the 4th with wild berry. And I wasn't really sure exactly what I was going to do at this point, so I did it very, very lightly. And just to make sure that's what I wanted to do. Now's the reason I don't like to use tape, because I have to pull all of this tape off. Sometimes if you're not careful, you can damage your stencil. It's just, and it takes a lot of time. So I use my Painter's Pals. I can use that to mask any areas that I don't want the paint to accidentally slip over into. And where the star is, I didn't want it blue, so I'm just using the rounded corner. See how nicely that fits in there. Masks it off super easily, makes it really easy to stencil, and you don't have to mess with taking all that tape off and adding all that tape. Always make sure your stencil is secured with tape, but use something else to mask it off. And I'm using Colonial Blue to base coat the letters. When I do a star that's someplace in the middle of, I can use a circle stencil, just a tiny bit bigger than the star, And see how perfect that is. It doesn't get anywhere else except exactly where I want it to be. I did go back and add 2 coats. I wanted this to be ombre, darker at the top and darker at the bottom. So I've loaded my number 4 Spectacular stencil. The first stenciling was with the number 5, but I'm using deep burgundy to deepen just the bottom edges, top and bottom of the letters. Just kind of walk it towards the middle. I want the darkness, but then softly blend into the middle area. Don't try to do this at once, and try to keep it soft towards the middle. If it isn't, I'll show you how to fix that, because I did that a couple places. It's super easy. Going back with deep midnight blue, and I don't want to get in the star, so I'm using that painter's pal to kind of just keep that area clean and clear of deep midnight blue, and doing the top and the bottom of all the letters. Not much paint on the brush. I go back and do this a couple times because 2 light coats is always better than 1 heavy coat, and it will look so much softer and so much more blended than 1 heavy coat. Right now it looks kind of like a hot mess, but it works out. You just have to kind of give it some grace here. And I did put a little bit of deep burgundy on the bottom of the star also. Now I'm going back with my second coat, because you do 2 coats. The first coat's a little bit dark, but the second coat's really going to bring that depth that you want on those letters. And just blend it up, blend it up, blend it down, blend it down. And don't overwork it. It doesn't take long. Ooh, see, that looks pretty good. It doesn't take long for it to all come together. And it's hard to envision with the stenciling so messy, but it works out well. Now I went down to a number 3 stencil brush, which is much, much smaller, and I'm honing in on the bottom edge of the red letters, putting some antique maroon. That's really going to resonate the same color palette that I used for the rest of the plaque, and it makes a huge difference. A little bit of paint makes a big difference, and it's so evident with this darker edges. This is Payne's Gray, just like this is what really brings those letters to life and really makes them glow. And that's kind of what I'm going for, just getting that glow. When I lift this stencil up, you'll see where the blues don't quite blend softly into the middle area, and they just need a little bit of a touch up. But I want you to notice when I lift the stencil, some of those areas are just a little bit off. The letters of are stenciled in soft black. I did 2 coats on them. 1 coat, let it dry, add the second coat. This is a real strong color, so it's not going to take a whole lot to get good coverage, even on a light surface. But I still use that painter's pal to mask it off. Can you see where that blue was not quite smooth? So I'm going back in with a little bit of colonial blue, and I'm blending it up and down just to help soften those edges. No different than if you're floating and shading. You want to lighten it or darken it, you can go back over it. And that just softens it down as needed, and you'll be able to tell if it does or doesn't. On some of it, I thought maybe it was a little bit too much, so I did go back and add a little more of the deep midnight blue. The only letter in this whole stencil that has bridges is the O, so I went ahead and used my Epic script liner in soft black to connect them. And then I realized that I had forgotten to shade the raw umber around the outer edges. So I did it very quickly. I wish I could do it as quickly as it looks like on the film, but I did go back and add that in. It's just a very light, not a very wide shade, so it's really easy to go back and touch that up. And you see where that design goes right up to the edge of the Y. It looks terrible. And I thought it needed to go past it just a little bit, so I just went back with my stencil and the cobblestone. I'm using my painter's pal to mask it off. What a difference. See how that design comes down? Just enough to make it look like it's not edged up right against the letter. And then I thought, well, what would happen if I put the lattice between the letters? Just that soft hint of design. I loved it. And it's just enough. And I sort of kind of tried to get them lined up a little bit, but I wasn't aware of that until after I was finished. And I thought, well, thank goodness they all lined up pretty well. So it looked good. Adding a little bit of splattering with raw umber. And with the splatter brush, I didn't want it real heavy on the letters, but I can kind of bop around. Using my chalk pencil, I wanted to put little stars on the letters. This is for placement, the vertical placement. And I've cleaned off my stencil. Make sure your stencil is clean, because if it's not clean, the stencils are translucent and you can see placement behind it. So if you have paint there and you can't tell where your stencil is being positioned, it's just going to be a guess. And every time I use it, I wipe it off. That way I know exactly it's right in the middle, right where my dot is, and it's centered on that vertical edge part of the letter perfectly. And having those off just a little bit can make a big difference. What's nice about the chalk pencil, when it gets wet, it disappears. That's a good thing. It also can be a bad thing, because if you're wanting your lines to show and you paint over it, they will disappear. I added a star on the red star. But back to that chalk pencil. It's really nice because when you go to varnish, you don't have to remember to erase the lines. They just kind of go away. I thought it would be fun to add a little more to those stars instead of just one star in the middle. And I'm using my stylus. And remember, after you dip dot quite a bit, clean your stylus off, because it will have paint residue that begins to tack up and your dots get real thick and heavy. And you want to make sure that they're all consistent in size. I wanted to add a drop shadow. I'm using raw umber on this to add that little bit of dimension. It's on the right side and across the bottom edge of all the letters, using my Epic script liner. And I found out the best way to do this is to have a puddle of thinned paint, so you don't have to get a consistency every time. If you have a nice size puddle of thinned paint on your palette, you can just grab it and continue the drop shadow. It has to be thin enough that it's going to be translucent, transparent almost. This is a shadow, so it won't have any heaviness to it. The raw umber can very easily become too overpowering. So you just work with it until you get that perfect consistency, and then make enough of it that you're going to be able to add this drop shadow very easily, so it all matches up. You don't want some of the shadows to be heavy and some of the shadows to be light. After it dries, take a peek at it and make sure that they are consistent. If some of them are a little bit thinner and they need to be strengthened, just put another very light float over top of it to build up that saturation so it looks like a shadow, and they all match up. I think that adds so much, and it's very easy to do. I am using not the tip of my brush, but I kind of lay it down flat and pull it down. I have enough paint on my brush. If you're not familiar with my Epic script liner, it's a little bit longer than a liner, shorter than a script, so it will give you a lot of length before you have to reload. I did go back and add a drop shadow under the star too. Okay, to make these work, it's just super simple. I use Velcro dots. Magnets aren't quite as strong as the Velcro dots are. Use 3 Velcros per section. These are 1/2-inch Velcro dots. And I'm putting there's a hook part and a soft fuzzy part. So I'm putting the hook part against the interchangeable piece, and the fuzzy part goes against the round plaque. Always start with, if this is your first one, start at the top, match up the holes. That's very important. The Velcro placement is almost a triangle so that it adheres well to the edge of the plaque. Very easy to pop off and pop on. Using the banner plaque, I did the same thing. On the bottom one, I added the triangle of 3, and then I put the fuzzy part against the hook part. And I use my stylus because it makes it easier. They're really sticky, and if you have a stylus, it'll stick to the Velcro and not your finger. And then position it, press down really, really well, and voila, it is that easy. Now, here comes the fun part. I want to swap that out. What I will do is add the other half of the Velcro to the one that's already on the plaque. And I use my stylus, like I said, it keeps it from sticking to your finger. And then put that on there, press it down well, and it's just perfect. This is so much fun. To swap them out, just pop it off, pop a new one in. You can use a name, you can personalize it, you can use it for any occasion. There's all kinds of stencils. You really need to check out this convertible line. It is so versatile. The possibilities are endless, and it is so much fun. My mind is swimming with different things to do. I love how it turned out, and I was kind of surprised. I had picked my favorite banner, but after I painted the second one, I'm not sure which one I like best. But it's so much fun to be able to have options. And I think with these new convertible pieces, it's going to open up a whole new world of opportunity. Door hangers are so popular right now, and with this new convertible line, you can have one base piece and then just swap out the different parts of it. So I hope you learned a few new tips, tricks, and techniques to make your painting world a little more fun and a lot less stressful. I would love to hear from you. Be sure to let me know if you have any comments or questions. Also, don't forget to hit the bell, like, and subscribe. That way you won't miss out on upcoming videos. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to our next painting adventure together. And remember, a little bit of paint makes a big difference. Thank you.